When I heard about Bitcoin in 2011, it was a leap beyond what I was thinking about, because all the virtual currencies and digital currencies up until then were centralized to some degree. All market making, all federal banks, all political considerations regarding money are all centralized. So the thing about Bitcoin that breaks it from everything else is that it's decentralized. And how do you create that decentralized network? And I think it's interesting because, again, getting back to Buckminster Fuller, a lot of his writings, from you look through it through a political lens, you would say this is not capitalism. This is something else. This is maybe the opposite of capitalism, and yet the result are tools that enable those who could call themselves capitalists to do fantastic work as capitalists. But there are a lot of elements to this post-internet age. Like we have the free open source software movement. You have Linux, which is free, essentially free software. You have Richard Stallman was big in his idea of free unlicensed software. The Lawrence Lessig's work with the Creative Commons license, which is outside of the trademark and patent system. And during the early part of the internet age, there was this tremendous, and you would appreciate this, and you were there as well. You had the work of those who considered the internet to be really a revisitation of the 1960s and the free love movement, and those who were taking drugs and hallucinating, Timothy Leary, and those folks. There was a moment in the internet's history before it became completely corporatized, where there was this feeling of freedom of expression that was going to be this huge movement. And our friend who wrote the Declaration of Independence for the Internet, John Perry Barlow, he was incredibly huge, at that time. And then the internet became completely corporatized. And it wasn't until Bitcoin came around that we had a new chapter in this idea of distribution and decentralization and individual empowerment and individual journeys. And I always compare Bitcoin to shamanism and kind of spiritualism and things like this, where people have the freedom to delve into their own spiritual journeys because they have unconfiscatable money that's never debasing in value. So they have no worries. In other words, you achieve individual sovereignty and you can just pursue spirituality. And I think that's where Bitcoin is heading. I think everyone ultimately achieves individual sovereignty. The whole idea of wealth changes dramatically itself. I mean, this would be a Buckminster Fuller idea, that his idea of wealth was very, very radically different than what most people consider to be wealth. So if you take that and if Bitcoin is the coin of his thinking, and then what do you have? If you had everyone thinking like Buckminster Fuller, the world would be a dramatically and drastically different place. And with Bitcoin, we can get to that place, and we are getting to that place, and it is happening right now, Robert.
Right. So I'm going to ask Kim, because when Fuller dies 83, he writes Grunge of Giants, Gross Universal Cash Heist. And now we have repo, reverse repo, and all this stuff going on. We have, $120 billion a month being pumped into to keep that balloon afloat of fake money. We're paying people not to work.
We have somebody else in our midst these days, like an Elon Musk, who has incredible confidence as an engineer, who is putting out things that are incredible products and scientific products and engineering products. And he's taken everybody on a bit of a journey, and he tries to articulate that journey in his own way. He's not a Buckminster Fuller. He would never write a book like Critical Path, but he is somebody who I think we can look to as similar to some degree, because he's somebody who has that confidence in themselves. Steve Jobs was also somebody who had the confidence as an engineer, as somebody who felt that they could architect the future and future-proof themselves. Then is that a gift? Can you learn that? Where does that come from? I think in Buckminster Fuller's case, he felt it was below the surface, and he needed to reach in to grab that. And the only way he could do it was to make that statement, I'm not going to work for money.
So he was speaking about the central banks and the school systems and all this stuff. He would murder me. So he says,
well, that's the same idea that you find in many artists, poets, and comedians.
So Max, this is for the three of us on this screen and everybody listening. So in 1981, he says, if people knew what I knew, they would kill me. So I write into the future and I use language they can't read. But he said to our group, he pointed straight, it was about 100 of us. He says, it's going to be your generation that takes the fight. And so here we are today taking the fight. And that's why I wanted to, to talk with you and all this, because you're in a fight.
I'm saying all along that this is going to end up in a major fight. I'm seeing it just in the last 2 weeks in the Bitcoin community. I've been saying for years now that it doesn't matter how friendly the regulators are. It doesn't matter what corporations buy it or don't buy it. At the end of the day, this is going to end up in a fight. It's going to end up in a serious fight because this is so disruptive to the status quo and the legacy system.
Bitcoin takes apart grunge. That's why when I read, 83, I read that book, I went, oh my God, what is this guy saying? But people couldn't understand him because he was writing about the future. And I have bad news for all of us listening to this program. Critical path is today. So Kim, what are we doing about it?
Yeah, so I just have a question for Max. When you say that there's going to be a fight, because we agree there's this big fight coming, is it the fight from centralized to decentralized? Is that the fight? What do you see as the fight?
It's a fight from centralized systems to decentralized systems. But you hear it in the rhetoric right now from senators like Elizabeth Warren just out this week saying, basically she's throwing the gauntlet down and picking a fight with Bitcoin. Brad Sherman is another politician who's been openly hostile to Bitcoin, and they're circling the wagons. They're getting their rhetoric together. They've come up with ESG, the environmental considerations, as the rallying cry for their attack on Bitcoin. Even though there's no basis for that, it makes no sense. But we know from history that propaganda is not based on things that make sense. Propaganda is based on an emotional appeal. If you can emotionally get people to throw away reason and think purely on emotional basis, you can rally them to do things against their own interest. So that's the only way they can attack the Bitcoin folks, to get people to attack them. But here's the great thing, Robert, is that Bitcoin is designed to attract attacks. And that's the game theory built into the protocol. And it's been doing this for 11 years now. And it's worked its way up from just a bunch of coders hating each other to a bunch of influencers hating each other to a bunch of politicians hating each other. Now we've got central banks hating each other and nation states hating each other. So El Salvador was the bravest and first to come out and say, we're going to make it legal tender. It makes perfect sense given their history. Read John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. You know why El Salvador would be one of the first countries to come out with a legal tender for Bitcoin. And so now you got U.S. senators coming out and hating on Bitcoin. But the more they attack it, the more hash rate goes up. Therefore, security goes up. Therefore, price goes up. So the more they attack it, the more the price goes up. And at the end of the day, they only have one weapon in their arsenal, and that's money printing.